Hello again, and welcome back to the video series on examining media and the ways that we interact with it, its forms, its manifestations, how it subtly is used to direct our thoughts and control our behaviors. In the last video, we were taking a look at an article and examining the ways that language is subtly used to engender feelings and emotional responses that then direct our thoughts and sort of prime us to think in ways that don't necessarily allow us to see the whole picture of what's being presented. We're going to pick back up with a dissection on this article and see what more we can find. Let's get right into it. One of the major issues with our news media today is that they're in the business of spinning narratives. Now, this means that they create, curate, and subtly craft a version of reality so that it's easily, readily, and rapidly digested by the public at large. Through the subtle use of directed moral arguments along with heavy emotional priming, readers are often left blind to the inherent bias and slanted reporting that actually achieves a hidden goal of many writers. The danger here is that the more that reality is spun into something that it's not, the further away from the truth we ultimately fall. Over time, these small inclusions and differentiations can and often do have a cumulative effect on a person's thoughts if they're not careful to identify when and where the spin is actually happening. Have you ever been frustrated or exhausted with a relative who can't stop parroting talking point after talking point as if they've downloaded the entire day's rundown of their favorite news organization? It's quite likely that they've fallen into this trap of emotional triggering, followed by careful crafting of a narrative to the extreme heights of some hypnotic effect. Now, we're all in danger of this, and we do need to have grace and patience with those people who are trapped in the spin cycle. So let's keep digging back into that article and hopefully learn to identify some of the other manipulations and the patterns that are present within it. I want to point out an aspect of this article that is in line with some of what we just looked at in the last video. It takes it to a new level. The article goes on to discuss U.S. farmers and their role in the global food crisis. Let's see if we can look at a couple excerpts and notice patterns as to how the writer presents this situation. Quote, "It is crucial that we as a nation rally our resources to support agricultural production and step into our role as a worldwide food supplier." Next, "The burden of solving this crisis will fall on the shoulders of the American farmer and rancher, and they will need help from the federal government to meet these challenges." And again, "Now is the time for the President and Congress to act. Farmers and ranchers need to use technology and innovation to adapt their operations, and Washington can truly be their partner in this effort. For example, many agricultural businesses are claiming the research and development tax credit to increase production and feed a hungry world. They then can qualify for this benefit by simply adapting their daily activities to improve yield and production, such as experimenting with different types of fertilizer and irrigation techniques, or integrating new technologies into their workflow." Unquote. Now, if we look at these three excerpts, what do we find? Bear in mind, we're not digging into these very deeply. We're just examining the statements and asking basic questions about them. The thing that jumps out to me is the massive level of assumptive thinking and that's underpinning the arguments regarding the U.S., its role in food production, the responsibility of the farmers on the world stage, the relationship between those farmers and the U.S. government, and even the process of operating a successful farming operation itself. Reading this, you would think that the writer is involved with and has a deep working knowledge of geopolitical relationships, domestic and foreign food production and distribution, operation costs of owning and maintaining a farm large enough to supply a significant percentage of the overall global food supply, and even the latest methodology and technology surrounding bulk fertilizer production and industrial level irrigation practices. Now, that's a tall order for any one person, to be sure, and maybe they do have this knowledge and are able to speak on what they know. Here's the thing though, when we examine who wrote the article, it could be certainly the case that a former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture would know a thing or two about the issues at hand. While this is an optimistic thing to consider regarding the truth of this writing, it still leaves a glaring issue hanging out in the open. The news is meant to report facts and events as they happen, objectively and without spin. Regardless of the operational models of the major network outlets that have been developed and ballooned into dizzying levels of narrative control and thought manipulation over decades, the facts and rationality should remain of the highest importance when we're trying to understand the world. In order to maintain the rationality required to discern truth, we must guard against fallacious reasoning processes at all costs. These thinking errors are ubiquitous in news media, and their pervasive presence, along with the devious way that they hijack logical thinking, is troublesome at best and catastrophic at the most extreme levels. I'm going to recommend a series of essays that discusses thinking tools and how to understand and spot logical fallacies, along with some other profoundly enlightening material. I'll link the website in the description box below this video. I'll be using these essays and referencing them from time to time, and I know that they're incredibly important and they reveal the deeper structures that I'm pointing out in these videos. I hope you'll give the series a follow. It's called The Frontisterium. It's well worth your time. Now, one of the most pernicious and destructive fallacies that is employed by the mainstream news media is what's known as an appeal to authority. This happens when arguments for anything depend on an expert rather than the reasons for the position given, and therefore the why of that position. Try to recall any time you've sat through a cable news show for any period of time, and you'll quickly see what I'm referencing. Our current system of legislative government has been inundated with this fallacious type of reasoning for my entire life, and likely much of yours. It permeates all levels of the institutions of education, the professional world, and is rampant within culture as a substitute for actual working knowledge acquired through individual investigative effort and integrity of thought. It is this fallacy that I see happening in these excerpts that I highlighted before. While the writer of the article may actually know what they're talking about at deep levels, all we're presented with are conclusions with no premises, and solutions to problems with not so much as a hint of how or why these are the preferred courses of action. The reason that this is dangerous is because through this manipulative tactic, the writer has actually done our thinking for us, and they've used subtle and crafty language that's meant to cause us to drop our guard and accept the attempted usurpation of our cognitive processing. There's far more to discuss here. Questions like what makes someone an expert? Or why do we allow for expert opinion to have so much power in representative government systems? Why do people use their assumed expertise in arrogant and self-serving ways? These are all questions that I hope to explore as the channel evolves. Due to the level of danger that surrounds the errors that can and do outcrop from fallacious reasoning, it's worth spending a great deal of time and effort to understand and identify wherever and whenever various fallacies are present within our own thinking. For myself, it has been a continual struggle to remain vigilant when it comes to the correction of these errors. The really tricky part is that it truly does take constant and consistent examination and focus once a certain level of heuristic patterning has become habitual within a person. If these patterns are ingrained to the point of subconscious processes, it's going to be very hard to make the changes necessary to fix the thinking errors. The process will also likely come with a great deal of pain. Yet, it is imperative that we do the work to become warriors for the truth. I see so much suffering in the world because people do not make the effort to examine their own thoughts for biases and errors. Now, please hear me, no one is perfect and no one is infallible to the point of being impervious to error. However, I believe that we should be concerned with seeking the truth, regardless of what we may think we will lose in the process. Reality is as it is. We can either deal with it honestly and devote our lives to the pursuit of truth, or we can do something else. It's important to understand that should we make the choice to pursue anything else, and it is a choice, that we then have chosen delusion. Now, I make this point not to be overtly negative or accusatory, actually very far from it. I have lived for decades planted firmly in a delusional frame of mind out of my own profound fear of the truth. One of the main reasons for this is that the truth cannot be bent to any human will or desire. It is the fixed state of things as the designer and creator of reality has built into his designs. The truth is as God has willed. The truth is the only real thing going, and it is far more perfect than any sort of delusion we may concoct from our own flawed devices. John 8:32 tells us that the truth will set you free, should we choose to abide in it. Our postmodern world has gone to great lengths to destroy the truth. Now, this is not a new thing, mind you. However, the ways in which we see the attempted destruction of truth have never been more overt, covert, or ubiquitous in all of human history, and things certainly seem to be headed down the path of delusion and destruction more and more rapidly as the years roll on. Most people do not even realize what is truly at stake, and while I have been firmly among that group, I have increasingly been shocked and frankly saddened by the all-out attack and war that is waged against truth in the world today. The effects are utterly destructive to all that is good and loving and beautiful. We are choosing bondage. There are powers at work whose chief aims are to keep us fearful and enslaved. They want us to continue to lock ourselves in a cage of our own design, blinded to the one thing that will provide the escape that those of us still trapped in fear so desperately seek. I say we choose truth and break free.